The French president's proposing military action against human traffickers in Libya, claiming it would help combat the migrant slave trade.
We are proposing to take police and military action. We're not waging war, but this is a country in a political transition.
Well, for more, let's cross live to our correspondent Maria Finoshina to find out more. Maria, what more can you tell us?
Well, human trafficking is indeed a huge problem for Northern Africa, but it's not a new one. For years, numerous human rights and immigration organizations have been alarming the public about what they call is a modern slavery, and no one argues that this problem should be fought. Although the French President Emmanuel Macron's proposal to try to solve it militarily has come as a surprise. As you remember, France already was part of a massive military operation in Libya designed to resolve the crisis of 2011. France had played then a very crucial role. France was sending its fighter jets to bomb Tripoli, and France was considering its actions very successful in Libya. We remember that after the death of the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, then the president Nicolas Sarkozy proclaimed officially that now Libya is on the way to democracy. Let's now remember.
Showed the world you would get rid of a dictator and you would choose freedom. Vive Benghazi! Vive la Libye!
The United States is committed to the Libyan people. You have won your revolution.
We came, we saw, he died.
But if we look at the facts and at what is really happening right now in Libya on the ground, we can say that the truth is, for all these years, Libya has been a troubled region with a level of violence and destabilization just being dramatic. So the 2011 military operation in Libya has eventually led to dramatic destabilization and a rising level of violence throughout the country. And this is why, after Emmanuel Macron's proposal to try to launch another military operation in Libya, many ask a question whether this time it will actually work to help bring balance back, or it will not work. Back to you.
That's Maria Finoshina live from Paris. Thanks for that, Maria. Well, let's continue the discussion now and cross live to our guest, a Beirut-based award-winning British journalist Martin Jay. Mr. Jay, good to see you. Now, what's behind Macron's initiative to tackle human trafficking in Libya?
Madness. I think it's the wackiest idea he's come up with so far in 6 months in office. I mean, he's positioned himself to be a sort of a Middle East peace broker, somebody who can be very much on the international circuit, and he's chosen the Middle East and North Africa to do that. But I think this idea is just insane. I think he's really trying to be, he's actually really trying to take over the job of the EU's own foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, because that's really her role. So I don't really understand why he's going ahead with this plan. He seems to be under a certain amount of pressure to resolve the immigration crisis, but you know, he along with EU leaders are not really looking at the real root cause of the problem. They're just sort of just throwing money at this issue without actually understanding how it really can be solved.
The timing's very peculiar, isn't it? This proposal only being made now when this problem's existed for ages.
Yeah, it's been with us for a very long time, but it's only in the recent few years since Libya has imploded, since the disastrous decision by France and Britain and America to go ahead with the UN plan in 2011. That's made things a lot worse. But also, we need to look at some of these countries where these people are coming from. You know, Chad, Central African Republic, and other countries in that region which have the most appalling human rights records from the most cruelest, most barbaric dictators ever. And we're giving them money. The European Union is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into these countries to keep those people in power, to keep the hegemony of the European Union and the flag flying there. And in return, you know, the EU isn't looking too closely at human rights records of those countries. So that's also part of it. It's partly because Libya has fallen to pieces and has become a suitable platform for the crossings. EU hasn't done anything about it, but it's also because a lot of these countries are not having any sort of accountability on the aid coming from the European Union or indeed France.
And of course, one other question that people might be overlooking already is, you know, would military intervention proposed by Macron be legal?
That's one very good question. Many people would say it isn't, because when or how are you going to get the mandate for that? It's not a completely original idea. Federica Mogherini, the EU's foreign policy chief, a couple of years ago, floated the same idea. She tried to get an EU-UN mandate in New York, which would involve, don't laugh, British warships patrolling the coast and firing randomly their shells at anybody they thought who were traffickers. She didn't manage to do that because there was no legal basis for it. And I think Macron's going to run into the similar problems. You know, what is the legal basis? Do you just go ahead and be very French? I mean, he seems to have this incredibly anachronistic, colonial, almost 19th century Joseph Conrad view of Africa. You know, he's not at all up to speed on the modern world. He believes that France could just brush aside international protocols and send its officers there to point guns at people. Now, of course, the problem with pointing guns at people is that sooner or later you have to shoot them if they're doing not what you want. And then what happens after that? You start to encourage an insurgency, various groups in the region, just like it did in Somalia in 1992, turn and focus towards one common enemy, which is usually the foreigner that's doing this sort of this policing. So it's an idea which I think he's come up with on the back of an envelope. He hasn't really given too much thought to, but he seems to be following Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007 of this being this sort of this champion of the Middle East. And I can't help wondering, in a few months' time, we won't hear the announcement of a new Middle Eastern policy centre, just like Sarkozy did. But this idea needs a lot more thought.
Do you think it could be effective against human trafficking, the flow of refugees, anything?
No, I don't. I think what we need to do is we need much more honesty from France and from the European Union. They need to look at the aid flowing into those countries and keeping those despots in power. We need to have a sort of new system whereby human rights accountability is linked to the kind of money that's going to those countries. If you look at a country like Central African Republic, for example, a couple of years ago the EU gave it $2 billion. That's $2 billion. That's almost, I mean, when you consider that the entire EU annual budget is only $150 billion, he gave it $2 billion just to restore itself after a civil war. You know, the EU, these leaders in these countries are basically making a mockery of the aid coming into them. What we need to do to resolve the problem is to look at the governance, the level of governance in those countries, and link human rights accountability to the amounts of money that is being shoveled their way from Brussels and from Paris.
Martin J., Beirut-based award-winning British journalist, thank you for your time. A US